Welcome. I'm Mike Nelson. I work here at Microsoft as a principal technology policy strategist. More importantly, I'm also very involved in the local chapter of the Internet Society, and very pleased that you could be here today. I'm very pleased that we have an audience out in webcast land, in the Twitterverse. This panel came together very, very quickly. David Brin is an old friend of mine, and he told me he was coming to town and offered to do an event with the chapter, and we quickly pulled together an all-star panel of people to talk about the topic confidentiality. Will we be able to keep secrets in the future? And what does it mean? What does it mean if a Swiss bank a Swiss bank can't even keep its records secret anymore? The State Department has 200,000 memos that leak out courtesy of WikiLeaks. So we're going to debate the question whether transparency is inevitable. If it is, what will happen? How will that change society? How will it change government? How will it change corporations? And if you don't believe transparency is inevitable, what is going to happen? One of our panelists who will be joining us shortly, Mark Rash, is an expert in cybersecurity and actually argues the other way, that we're going to find ways to lock down information. This is going to be a very informal discussion. It's designed to be a round table, although we have no table. We do have a great set of experts as well as a very good audience with lots of questions. So this is going to be no slides, no speeches, just back and forth conversation. I'm going to start by asking each of our panelists to just give us the short, 90 seconds of who they are and why they care about confidentiality, and then we'll dive into the topic. So, David?
Oh, yes, right. Yeah, I'm David Brin. I'm in town because of the big gala at the Reagan Center over the weekend. Brian Greene, Patrick Stewart, and all that about science fiction, and the future. So that's looking, a little farther ahead. And but this other hat that I wear is as author of the Transparent Society. Will technology make us choose between freedom and privacy? Which is hardly a field that you'd expect an astrophysicist or a science fiction author to go into. But I got very bugged attending computers, freedom and privacy discussions and Internet Society discussions in the 90s by what seemed to me to be an obvious following of a mentality in a direction that did not pay any attention to what got us our freedom, why we're here able to hold these discussions, why we're able to be resentful of apparent declines in privacy and freedom. You have to look at the basic backdrop first and see the context within it's all happening. And we have this freedom for certain reasons that I think have been, to a large extent, overlooked.
So Tom Lee, who's the director of the Sunlight Labs, which is part of the Sunlight Foundation, and a return speaker here with the Internet Society. He's been with us before.
That's right. The Labs is an engineering department of Sunlight. Sunlight, as a whole, is a transparency organization devoted to making government more accountable. We feel that information is a fundamental input to democratic processes, and that more of it makes the system work better. In the Labs, we're in a unique position to employ technology toward that mission. And of course, it is technology that's bringing us here today to talk about how the flow of information has been changed. So I'm very glad to be a part of that conversation.
Next to him is Greg Ellen, who is a serial entrepreneur, former chief data officer at the Federal Communications Commission, and doing something really crazy and exciting now.
Wow, I think you took all of my punchlines. So
no, you got the punchline.
I came to DC with the Sunlight Foundation and was a predecessor of Tom Lee's before a secret coup took place. No, just kidding. And worked as a chief data officer, very interested in opening up information, because I think that the internet has taught us that there's a very interesting dynamic when not only information is open, but there's open participation. And I'm here because I have some confidential information on Mike Nelson, which I'm trying to figure out whether it's going to be valuable 20 years from now or not.
Use it now, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Alan Holmes is an old friend, and he's been writing about technology in various information technology journals and newspapers. We worked together at Bloomberg Government, and now he's with the Center for Public Integrity, which makes a living exposing secrets.
That's right. The Center for Public Integrity is, although it doesn't sound like it, it is an organization of investigative journalists. And what we do is we look at how money and power influence public policy, typically not in the public interest. Do very similar things that what the Sunlight Foundation does. What we do is we like to crunch big data sets to try to find correlations or uncover the eurekas or show something where something is moving. And all that is getting more and more electronic and getting access to that, and really truly believes that if you can show who's doing what and spending what and how that affects public policy, that's a good thing.
And finally, Barry Pavel is at the Atlantic Council, where he is the director of the Scowcroft Center. He's coming from the national security side of the house.
Yeah, I'm a former government bureaucrat, and I'm here to help. No, we, at the Scowcroft Center, I spent 15 years in the Pentagon and 2 at the White House on defense issues, so I know a little bit about confidentiality, at least in that sense. But what I spend quite a bit of our time at the Scowcroft Center at the Atlantic Council on is trying to make sense of sort of the direction the world's going in, and then how do we get a better handle on navigating it. We had a big conference yesterday with David Brin and others on why we think we're in a new era of world history, but the historians haven't named it yet.
Mm-hmm. Barry runs an amazing conference once a year, the Strategic Foresight Conference. Barry and a small group are in that very small overlap between people who care about national security and people who know about technology. He's in a very small little sliver that overlaps. And so I'm going to start with you. Let's start with case studies. When I'm a professor at Georgetown, I teach a series of case studies. WikiLeaks is still an incredibly important case study. What did we learn from that? I mean, when I look at what happened, I see a whole bunch of information that got out that wasn't supposed to get out, but it turned out that much of that information has shaped policy. It's helped fuel the Arab Spring. It's led to maybe less corruption, or at least more awareness of corruption. There's a lot of things that good came out of that. So what do you think, Barry? Should we have 5 more WikiLeaks episodes this year?
I'll sort of give you, I think, a 3-part answer. Number one, I'm not sure all of it that came out has good effects necessarily. I do think the more information that's out, sort of the better. But number 2 is, there's probably a few crown jewels that if anyone who is listening to this right now would say, that's probably best that's the kind of information that probably shouldn't get in the hands of someone who has very bad intentions. So there's probably a small subset, and I would argue much smaller than the current national security apparatus, which had its origins almost 70 years ago now, in 1947. I would argue that that culture is exactly the opposite of actually what's needed now for their mission. And so my primary hypothesis when it comes to the part of our government that is focused on what they think is very valuable information, that is the intelligence community, in my view, was designed for an era when it was really hard to get information and much easier to analyze it. And now that it's the opposite, I think we are very misaligned with that part of what our taxpayer money pays for.
But you've had a lot of colleagues at the Atlantic Council, a lot of former colleagues still within the Defense Department who look at WikiLeaks and draw exactly the opposite conclusion from what you and I conclude.
I've been telling them...
We conclude more information is better. They conclude, oh my God, we've got to lock it down.
Well, it does cause more work, and in some cases more, it doesn't help. But I've been trying to get them to focus on the Snowden after next.
Oh, that sounds like a good sequel.
Not even this one.
Okay.
In other words, they're chasing the headline when they should be looking at the broader trend and figuring out how to realign to deal better with this new world.
Okay, well, pass the microphone to Mark Rash, who's going to tell us who you are, why you care about confidentiality.
Where I was for the last 15 minutes, which was at 1901 K Street. It
Oh,
got mistranslated into my calendar when I
oh
transferred.
no.
By the way, you guys aren't there, so.
We have better food here,
I
actually.
think that's true. I'm Mark Rash. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer for SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation. And in a previous life, I was a federal prosecutor, started the Justice Department Computer Crime Unit, which at the time I left the Justice Department consisted of me. So it made the staff meetings kind of interesting.
And there were about 4 criminals at the
There
time.
were 4, and we caught them all, and we solved the problem of computer crime, so I left.
You missed one.
I did miss one, and
You
I
missed
know
one.
I know who it is. Right. On the Snowden issue, I was at a meeting with the head of counterintelligence for the FBI, and he took the FBI's position, which I've heard repeated in a lot of government agencies, that Snowden is and always was a spy, that Snowden's purpose and intent was to harm the national security of the United States, that Snowden, it's no coincidence that Snowden ended up in Russia. He intended all the time to turn over U.S. secrets to Russia and intended to harm the national security. And the problem with that is I can understand why they believe that, but the problem with that philosophy, and you dropped your cell phone right there. Hopefully it's a Microsoft cell phone. The problem with starting with that philosophy is it doesn't begin to understand the motivations of a Snowden. Not of Snowden, but of a Snowden. And when you're trying to deal with the problem of the insider threat, you have to understand what why an insider does what they do. And the other problem is we talk about whistleblower. A whistleblower is typically somebody who uncovers illegal conduct and decides that they want to report that illegal conduct. And Snowden doesn't fit within that either, because what he discovered was perfectly legal, or at least approved, conduct that he disagreed with. And not only did he disagree with it, but that he believed that the public had a right to know about. And so there's no mechanism for a non-whistleblower to express their beliefs and have them heard out. And if you treat him like a spy, you're going to be dealing with the wrong issue.
What about the Chelsea Manning case, though?
Right.
That's the classic example that people point to when they say government could be more transparent.
Well,
Look at all this useful information that the government was collecting, and could have been shared in some way. Instead, it
well,
was.
what's interesting about the Chelsea Manning case is that if you look at the underlying documentation in the Snowden case and the Manning case, there's a huge difference between the two types of data. And I have a lot more sympathy, and I prosecuted espionage cases too. I have a lot more sympathy for, quite frankly, the Snowden disclosures, because those were policy matters. What Snowden disclosed was the fact that the government was conducting this type of surveillance, not who we were conducting it on. The fact that we collect data, that we believe we have a legal right to collect data on every American. The fact that we believe we have a legal right to infect computers, weaken encryption, and all that stuff. Those are kind of policy discussions that we should be having in any event. What Manning disclosed was more operational stuff.
Yeah.
And
Well, some analysis, though. I mean, the
That's
State
true.
Department memos were exposing corruption. They were.
Manning didn't go through that kind of analysis. Manning did a core dump and said, but in Manning's defense, and again, I prosecuted espionage cases, he disclosed this information like Snowden did to a journalist and said, hey, journalists, go through the journalistic functions of deciding, what to publish, what not to publish. He didn't just do a core dump himself.
Yeah.
So that happened in both cases.
Okay, let's turn to a journalist or former journalist. Alan, do you want to?
There's no
You're-
such thing as a former journalist. It's like being an ex-Marine.
So are we going to see more WikiLeaks? Are we going to see, is transparency inevitable, or do you think the reaction to all of the Snowden cases and the exposure is going to be tighter controls?
I think it will continue. I just, I'm covering.
No, he's got a microphone. We all have microphones.
Oh, I will.
I think it may not be turned off. Yeah.
Maybe I didn't.
Did you turn it on? Yeah.
But anyway, knowing how poor security is practiced throughout government, and even probably a little bit better in the private sector, but it's not great. Look at Target. Yes, it's going to continue, and whether they the leaks go to a journalist or not is up for debate. But yeah, I definitely believe that you're going to continue to see this. There's no 100% secure computer system.
Are journalists going to get better at pulling it out? I mean, this isn't just about technology. This is about more effective means of convincing people to open up.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the old skill set that journalists still have. There are fewer of them though. I mean,
bloggers don't count.
I'm sorry?
Bloggers don't count. People with smartphones.
But it depends on who the blogger is, but yeah, but I think overall there are fewer journalists, there are fewer people doing this, and that's why my organization at the Center for Public Integrity is probably seeing more interest in what we do, because there's fewer journalists at mainstream newspapers and news outlets that can do this because they just don't have the money anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
But yes, I think you'll definitely see more.
Okay, so you can check your microphone there to see if it's okay. Greg, do you want to talk a little bit about the role that open data and more transparency in government
Sure.
could
Can
play?
I take a poll of the audience first?
Sure.
Can I,
You can do whatever you like. This is informal.
But this is informal. So, everyone at home, you could tweet your answer to this since you can't raise your hands. So I want everyone to think of a number between 1 and 100. Just pick a number. Don't say what it is. Now, if that number is even, I want you to lie when you answer this next question. Okay? Raise your hand if you think that when we get a transparent society, you'll beat your wife and children or your spouse and your children less than you are today. Okay.
That's telling.
That was very informative. I wanted to. So I'm glad to see that most people are not going to change their habits of they're not going to beat their spouse and
And an
children.
anonymity poll. I've never seen that done so effectively. So an anonymous survey in person. That's pretty good.
Yeah. So okay. I think you're getting, that was actually the point that I was after. It's really the subtleties of the way the question is phrased that can trip you up. I think that, it's, I have to admit that for myself, the larger inspiration has always been there's something magical about the openness of the internet. And that the internet itself has kind of said, you know what, if we peer with each other and we establish a very small set of protocols of how we interact, then there can be a lot of innovation that occurs. And so opening up data for me has been not so much getting new data available to the public, quite frankly, as it has been that taking data that has been mandated to be legally disclosed, information that has been out there for many years, and bringing it into the internet way of exchanging information, making it machine readable, making it accessible 24/7, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, that has been the larger driver, and it's a smaller driver around the questions of should more information be available today than was before? Because we have a tradition in America of disclosure. Mm-hmm. It goes all the way back to the Constitution.
Okay, Tom, are we winning? Is the transparency lobby winning?
I think we're making progress, and I would say that there shouldn't be any doubt about the efficacy of transparency, its importance. It's difficult to define counterfactuals, but we've got pretty good evidence that more transparent policies, more data release can lead to things like fewer corruptions for public corruption. When you look at the introduction of FOI laws across the states and do a timing analysis, political budget cycles where administrations invest more money in the economy right before an election, that diminishes in more transparent countries. There are real benefits here. What I would say, though, is that the role
just to challenge that, I mean, you do have people saying that things are too transparent. You can't have a good time and be a congressman anymore. It's just the number of people who don't get into politics or don't take a public position is maybe related to the fact that you just can't
That there are more
be
women.
private.
That there are more women in politics now.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
I mean,
What about Rob Ford? I mean,
That's true.
I mean, certainly, we may need to continue to shift our norms. I don't think that the way that we adapt to the level of information, the type of information that's disclosed, is necessarily caught up with what technology enables. But I'm not sure that any of us, could really imagine what life in a very small medieval town would be like, right? There's a different kind of panopticon. What technology is doing is multiplying the effect of mechanisms like whistleblowers, like disclosures, but I don't think it's changing the fundamental nature of those disclosures or the mechanisms by which they are effective. What I would point to, though, is that the way that those effects are distributed is also kind of obeying the way our society is normally organized, and it's quite problematic in a lot of ways. There is an embrace of technology and its capacity for enhancing transparency by the administration and other parties, but it's in some ways quite half-hearted. You can look at just the example of the IRS, for instance, where we've got a lot of data disclosed by them in the form of 990s about nonprofits. They are declining to enforce laws about how C4s are organized, gigantic amounts of.
And what are C4s for?
C4s are a nonprofit organization that's increasingly used by political entities to funnel money into our system. And basically, because it's a charged environment, the IRS is declining to require disclosure of their donors or to require that they be reclassified as different entities.
And that's C as in Carl?
That's
Carl
right,
Rove,
C4s.
yeah.
That's exactly right. So look, we've got
5013CC.
yeah, we've got no information about C4s. We have some information. We don't have the information we ought to have under the law. Information about C3s and other organizations that are politically active are disclosed as open data. They're TIFF files that you have to scan in an OCR. And Carl Malamud, a lone hero on the internet, is the only person who does this. Meanwhile,
He's the patron saint of openness.
That's right. Meanwhile, individual citizens' social security numbers are scattered throughout this database, and the IRS won't even take Carl's call. So, basically, there's very little attention paid to how disclosure is affecting the little guy, and quite a bit of preservation of the big guy's power within the system.
Okay, so transparency is here, but it's not evenly distributed. Is that going to change?
Well, gradually, the unevenness isn't going to change, but if we are aggressive, it won't get worse. When I am after my fourth or fifth beer, feeling very political and depressed, I, would say that we're experiencing right now a deliberate reigniting of the American Civil War, because the main effect of the political paralysis that we have in this town is to destroy the ability of the republic to solve problems. And if you look across the last 100 years, that ability has been prodigious. If you look at the reasons for optimism in the world, putting aside the Antarctic ice sheet and a number of other things, there are many, many positive trends in the world today. Overall, per capita decreases in violence, decreases in poverty, and a substantial trend over the next 30 years, if we can maintain a true international pax, that a general zeitgeist on the planet of openness and assumptions of individualism and tolerance and diversity. But if you were to read Putin's speech last week about how a new alliance is going to stand up to the bullying of the hegemony of diversity.
He used that phrase?
Yes.
That wasn't a mistranslation.
Wow.
It must. His poll ratings probably went up five more points after that one.
The notion that this decadent worldview must pass away in favor of traditional values. This is a guy who thinks the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy in history, and officially despises communism and visits the Russian Orthodox Church every week.
And thinks the internet was a CIA project.
This is, as we say, illogical. But the point is that when I consult with, putting aside the reignited Civil War, which we can talk about the reasons, and threats like that and the good news I described, The fundamental is whether or not this republic can return to being a society in which people negotiate with each other, in which...
But some people say openness makes that harder. You can't do backroom deals. You know, everything's in the open. Everybody knows who's getting what, and who wins and who loses. And
that's a very good provocative question, but in fact...
Openness is knowledge. The fact that information is out there doesn't mean it's a simple process to use. We're essentially stupid people.
But no, but you see, this is, in my opinion, the reason for igniting the Civil War. As long as politics in America can be based upon visceral, emotional loyalties, then evidence plays no role. As a matter of fact, the evidentiary professions, the skilled professions of knowledge, all of them are on the enemy's list. I can name 3 exceptions, but I defy people online to name them, and they can't. So it's not just a war on science. I didn't mean to get all political on this, because when you get right down to it, I talk to, once or twice a year, I fly back east here, and I talk to defense and security and intelligence specialists. And I point out to them one fundamental across the next 50 years. And that is all the enemies, all the foes who want our destruction, as opposed to rivals, business rivals, and that sort of thing, which we can easily live with. All of them share one trait, and that is a fatal allergy to light.
mm-hmm.
Criminals, Putin-esque countries,
North Korea,
the terrorist cells, all of them are lethally allergic to light, and I would include conspiratorial oligarchies, are lethally allergic to light. Our system proves again and again that we find light sometimes irksome. And that is the net effect of Assange and Manning and Snowden, is that at worst it was irksome. Worse than that, the worst it gets is that it is occasionally lethal to leaders.
mm-hmm.
But we make that distinction. And hence, because of that distinction, light tends to be bracing, it tends to be invigorating. Whatever Snowden's motives, and I quite agree that he was a complicated fellow and possibly even a double agent. Snowden represents a class of people I discussed in the Transparent Society called the social T cell, in which you have...
Like an immune system.
Yes. Egotistical bachelor males, male underachievers, who see an opportunity to become a hero. And in an act of preening, do more than the evidence suggests, the degree of heinousness of what they revealed. As a matter of fact, I think Hillary Clinton gave a secret medal to Assange, because if you look at the cause and effect relationship of those 250,000 State Department memos, there were a few embarrassing things, and there were a couple of hundred cables of U.S. State Department officials discreetly and confidentially despising Mubarak, and despising the dictators they had to work with.
Well, the Iranians had a press conference to denounce the whole thing as a fraud because it was exposing the U.S. as being on the right side of issues.
Exactly, and so the net result was no American flags being burned.
Okay, let's go global for a minute. I'm going to turn to the audience here very quick for questions, but one global question. This week we've seen the headlines about the right to be forgotten, the fact that the European Union Court of Justice has decided that Google cannot link to personal information and news reports, public information. This is public information that's on the web. Google is being told that they can be requested and required to not link to a particular piece of information. So this is totally the opposite of transparency. It's an old idea. People want to have some zone of privacy, and now they're going to court in Europe to get this. Does anybody think this is a good idea, and does anybody think it's going to actually happen?
I think it's a good idea.
Which part of it? The right to be forgotten?
The right to be forgotten. Okay. Does it off? I think it's a good idea, the right to be forgotten, for certain information, and I think that is completely impractical the way it was implemented, and probably unfair the way it was implemented. Unfair to Google. Yes, unfair to Google. First of all, we have to differentiate between different types of information. There's a whole bunch of information that is collected that is intended to be ephemeral and have only a temporary lifespan. And something like that, like traffic information, as you drive on the Beltway, there's a legitimate reason to collect it, but no legitimate reason to retain it.
Well, I might want it retained. I mean,
You might.
If in 3 years I'm accused of murder and I can prove that with this data I was in
And my
another
answer to
county.
you is, tough luck. I would have said a different word, but yeah, I mean, the point about it is, it's intended to be ephemeral.
Right.
And even though there are some societal advantages to retaining the data, okay, it's intended to be ephemeral. That's the kind of stuff that you should have a right to have forgotten. That's one. The second, and this is really tough from a criminal law standpoint, is if you get arrested for DUI in Massachusetts, the fact that you got arrested goes on a police blotter. And in the old days, in 1960, if you got arrested for DUI and then it was dismissed and you got it expunged, it was literally gone. Now, the fact that it's been the arrest is now reproduced on dozens of web pages. Immediately after the arrest, you start getting letters from damn criminal lawyers saying, you know, would you like me? And it persists, and it persists forever. So there's a lot of information that should not persist. The problem is we can't decide which information should persist and which one shouldn't. So the right to be forgotten, the right to have ephemeral information exist only for an ephemeral period of time is a good thing, okay? But it's a very difficult thing to decide.
There is a California state law that says that children, minors, have a right to be forgotten, and that they should have the ability to make sure.
I think I have kids. I don't recall.
The idea was that if you posted something on Facebook when you were 13, you should have the ability to make sure that never appears again. But even there, if somebody else copies it and puts it on their own blog
Well,
and makes
as
fun
Ben
of you-
Franklin said, two people can keep a secret provided one of them is dead.
Yeah.
I'll
Okay,
just-
Tom.
Because I wanted to key off of that.
You're going to tell him he's right or wrong?
No, I think that he is right in a lot of respects. The specific EU proposal is getting pretty harsh reaction, including years before from some technical bodies within the EU who declared it unworkable. And there are others that predate it. I think Victor Meyer-Schonberger has had a bunch of proposals around metadata and automatic expiration of content. I think technologists tend to think they're unworkable, but practically they are doable when you have a concentrated player in the marketplace. This example is closely related to the mugshot sites the New York Times wrote about last year. That article basically single-handedly ended that horrible, horrible little industry because it got Google to take notice and deprioritize them in their search results. So it ceased to be a lucrative business to collect mugshots from sheriff's websites and charge people to take them down. Now, that information is still in the public domain, and it's still, someone could create a separate web crawler, but just the facts of how we navigate the web between Google and Bing and a few other big players who are capable of indexing this amount of information makes it feasible to have an impact because of those concentration points.
Other comments on the?
Yeah, I guess I'll make a comment here, because I think that there's perhaps a useful distinction that people have not talked about. Well, let me rephrase that. There's a useful distinction that needs a more explicit airing than has gotten to date. And that distinction is between public and very public. Mm-hmm. And we at the FCC encountered this issue, have encountered this issue a few times. And with the project that I worked on, which was the public inspection file, were documents that TV stations had been making publicly available for 70 years. The commission decided we're now going to be available online in a database,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the problem is, if you want to
Just
go
the
around,
new ones or the entire history?
It's basically the new ones, the current ones moving forward, because there was already rules in place that essentially had to do with you only have to keep the ones that pertain to the current license you have,
Mm-hmm.
or current things that are being adjudicated or in court or something like that. So there was already a schedule,
Mm-hmm.
documented schedule. And in fact, sidebar really quick, all information management in the federal government has a schedule. That is, I am allowed to destroy certain information after a certain period of time, and I may even be required to destroy it after a certain period of time. You only have to, personal, you only have to keep your tax records so many years, But in government, it's the same thing. After so much time, I either destroy it or I give it to the archives. But everything is supposed to have a schedule. So information was available that had to do with the price of political advertisements. Because it's very necessary for democracy that I can buy equal time at the same price that Tom is buying time during a campaign. So that's only appropriate.
Right.
But I think that an issue that came up there, and this is not unique, is that suddenly information that was public was now going to be very easy for people to find regarding the pricing of the advertisements. And that concerned the television stations greatly. And if you read the letter of the law, there is no distinction in our current laws between public and public online.
Right.
And it's very easy for Sunlight Foundation and for pro-open advocacy people to say, look, we want this, if it's public, I just want to get it on the web because A, that's how I get it. B, it's more convenient. I can't drive around to all these TV stations or all these different polling places. I want to have this information online. And it's supposed to be public anyway, so why would you make that distinction? But at the same time, there is a difference between something being available in the library or something being available somewhere and something being available in a way that you can easily find it and aggregate it.
Who was the judge who said pragmatic obscurity? It was a justice from the last round of Supreme Court justices. And I consider that to be an incredibly foolish distinction, although something similar is not foolish.
Let me ask you this really quickly. Okay, great. So I'm not in making the distinction. I'm not saying what we should do with the two. I'm just saying that maybe we should explicitly talk about that distinction because we haven't been explicitly talking about it. And if you've got an alternative, please.
Well, yes, because it has to do with the sliding scale of accountability. The mighty need more accountability than average people, and especially than our children. This is already enshrined both in common law and in regular law. Some of you out there, if your particulars are posted online, you have a right to sue for violation of privacy. I don't. I'm a public figure. I would have to show damages. The fact of the matter is that there's already a sliding scale here, and if you're talking about what the Europeans want to achieve with this on a pragmatic basis, enabling children who do something embarrassing to say, don't link to this. On a pragmatic basis of 5 years, I think the Europeans are ahead of us. Psychologically, I think they are out of their ever-loving gourds because they actually think that they can control the flow of information over time.
So does Mr. Putin.
Yes.
So do the Chinese.
And it is in our interest to make sure that the world sees and this is what I tell the people in the CIA and all these people. What's convenient for you is not important. What's needed is a secular trend toward a more open world, because in that world, villains will not thrive, and our general way of life will. Now, our children are already on Facebook voting by their postings. They are both voting and vesting faith in a future in which people will be forgiven for non-heinous, non-deliberately harmful, embarrassing things. They are already declaring their fealty to such a world by investing a need for it.
But if you're the owner of the LA Clippers,
then he's being held accountable. He's a public figure.
well, but in that case, it's not public information or very public information. It's very private information. It's a conversation and we're seeing this. We'll get the yeah.
As a people, we need to get used to this notion that whatever anybody is caught saying by somebody who spied on them in a private conversation, it should be cut in half. I think that's a fair.
That's a good factor.
Rule of thumb.
Okay, I got a question.
Everyone
here.
is caught in. Sorry.
In his case, it being caught in half merely wants me to throttle him. Still pretty bad.
Interesting discussion. My name is Lee Marie Thompson. I'm with the ISOC DC chapter. And to stir up a little bit even further the conversation, do you think individuals in a respected sovereign state have the right to lobby their governments to determine how they want the internet rules to be when it comes to keeping secrets or not keeping secrets? What are the rights for those that are not in the U.S. and respected countries that they want to lobby their governments to make decisions like what was done in the Europe?
So anybody who wants to take on the global trends?
The balkanization of the internet, right?
Okay.
Well, all right. So I think each country has its own values, mores, and laws that reflect those. And as a society and as a culture, they can value privacy more or less in another country. They can value openness more or less. They can value corporate entitlement more or less in another country. And they can try to, and you can certainly lobby the legislature, of one country to try to impose rules. Ultimately, it's doomed to failure because of the nature of the internet itself. And we see this over and over again when we try to regulate content on the internet or display of content. So what they might be able to do is regulate collection of information, okay, about individuals, or use of information about individuals by companies within that nation, but the nature of the internet is such that we see this in the UK. They have an Official Secrets Act, so you can't publish certain information in the UK. Well, you simply publish it on a website in the Isle of Man, and you're done.
So we have Tabloid Island, and
Yeah,
the
Tabloid Island.
same sort of trend we saw with pirated software and pirated music. We're going to have.
Yeah, I
places
mean,
that
except for
are just full of
Microsoft. Nobody
secrets.
pirates Microsoft.
Nobody. You're right. They should never do that.
There will be alternatives to the internet, mesh interface
Yep.
networks of your cell phones, and we're going to need this for national security. Besides which, there's the Moore's law of cameras. Somebody called it Brin's corollary once. That the number of cameras is increasing, their number, diversity, range, acuity, mobility, every year faster than Moore's law. In such a world, especially as we also are developing whistleblowers and things like that, it's best if you try to develop your legal structures so that they are working with such trends. So they're working with the fact that you will have new leaks every year, and those who promise that there won't be another Target or another Heartbleed are idiots. Whereas you hope that the pragmatic improvements of security continue, but always in the moving with the flow of the tsunami, so that we can steer, so we can surf. If you try to run against the tsunami, which is the European policy, it's not going to work. It's just going to create illusions.
I just want to riff off of one quick thing about the cameras. So I was talking to somebody about license plate recognition software and how we need to regulate and control police use of license plate recognition software. And he pointed out that with everybody having a camera in your pocket, there's nothing to stop us from crowdsourcing exactly the same thing, and ultimately we'll be there at the end of the day. So whatever regulation you put on the police about that, you have to remember that you're going to have it all crowdsourced 3 years afterwards, and all the regulations will be useless.
Okay, Barry, you're only here for another 10 minutes, and I want to get the international perspective. I mean, do we see countries going in different directions here? Do we see countries embracing transparency at the same time other ones are trying to lock it all down?
We don't. I mean, I guess that I'd make sort of one here and now point and one 2020 point. The here and now point is my heart says I'm with David Brin, and this is all for the good. My worry is that more authoritarian governments who, as the Obama administration says, are still using 20th century tactics, even though I actually think they're 21st century tactics. My worry is, I mean, there's a race between the individual and the state.
Mm-hmm.
As the communications revolution continues and as the next 6 revolutions come on top of that. And I am an optimist that the race will be won by the people. But I still have some significant residual worries that some of these countries with different cultures and with different polities and different government experiences might not get the memo.
So you don't reject Yevgeny Morozov's thesis that the bad guys could exploit all this openness of...
I think I think we're seeing it. I don't think they'll win. I think it's unstoppable, but I worry about how quickly we get there. The 2020 question I wanted to pose was, does any of our discussion change when, for example, 3D printed files get thrown across the internet of biological weapons or something worse? And I've had discussions with government officials within the last month about very, very related questions.
Well, lawyers will tell you that bad cases make interesting law, and that's a really bad case. I think, Tom, did somebody want to pick up on 3D printers?
Well, I'm always happy to talk about 3D
Okay,
printers.
go ahead.
But actually, I mean, just to take a step back, I worry that this conversation seems strange to say it here, but it's kind of suffering from an engineering mindset, I think, in that, yes,
We've got a lawyer over there.
I mean, everybody's absolutely right that, a lot of things technology is making possible are inevitable. Yes, you cannot fight against the feasibility of license plate scanning without some incomprehensibly repressive regime to restrict the flow of technology. And yes, the EU restriction will not be perfect and won't prevent people from being able to assemble this kind of knowledge. But I guess the point I would make is that this is really a kind of binary way of looking at things. It ignores the fact that access to information exists in an economic equilibrium. There are costs associated with collecting, organizing, retaining, searching, and even deleting information. And policy can shift all of those costs to make these activities more or less likely. It's a little bit uncomfortable to think that whether or not an intemperate tweet I sent 2 years ago could be the thing that gets me hounded out of a job 5 years from now in a probabilistic way, instead of getting a guarantee that this is how our society operates or isn't. But that's just the way that it works, I think. And we can collectively try to shift those probabilities, but I don't know that we're going to arrive at guarantees.
Well, this is what Greg was saying when he was talking about open and more open, or what was it again?
Open versus very open.
Yes, and I was actually going to say that I agree with this on a different level, and that is when you talk about that sliding scale.
It's public versus, I'm sorry, it's public.
Public versus very public.
You
Very
talk
public.
about that sliding scale, and when you're dealing with the average person being extorted by a mugshot site, I am perfectly in favor of something that you were hinting at, I believe, or it's what I got from what you were saying, and that there be an economic disincentive for that to be the first thing that comes up. That the embarrassing things that are really what we would call nobody's business, but in the age of the village, the returning village, can be everybody's business, but you have to actually prove yourself to be a bit nosy to find them, or pay 25 cents, or pay $1. I'm perfectly willing to negotiate those sliding scales. But the point is to expect that to be the world. Look, you're going to be walking down the street. It ain't just the
Google Glass.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just the license plates. It's the face registries, which are currently banned. But they're coming back. They're coming anyway. And you are going to see name tags under everybody walking by. You'll never be at a loss for words. You'll see the first three sentences of their profile, or click your tooth and scroll, and you'll get the 3 sentences of dissenting opinions from their ex-spouses.
Except for the brilliant new invention, the super realistic mask.
Oh,
There's a company that's selling these.
Yes,
it's
I saw
it's
that.
brilliant. The first one they made was a very realistic mask of the CEO of the
Oh
company.
my God, Elvis is going to be everywhere.
You have 20 choices now.
I have this in my novels, Existence and in Killing People, and
But they're really realistic.
It'll
I mean, you
work
can't
for
tell.
6 months.
You can't tell. You can't tell.
Yes, but then people will be tracking camera back until they see a guy entering a men's room with a paper bag.
Okay. You're too smart. Okay, questions. Okay, make it controversial. We don't have enough yelling yet. Fine.
We can always talk about Beyonce and Jay-Z and Solange if you like. I wanted to ask you about the legal side, and this is probably again for you, how laws will change as far as privacy. Do you anticipate in general that laws will change about what's considered the appropriate use of a camera, especially if we get into the microchips where you can actually start filming people without them knowing?
The answer is that laws are going to change, but they're going to not necessarily in the way you think they are. Initially, the reaction to any new technology is to say, that's horrible, it needs to be banned. Then it gets accepted. Then it gets regulated. then it gets even more accepted and it becomes part of normal life. So if you look at the like facial recognition, first we're scared of it. I'm scared of it. I don't think it's anybody's business to be able to put in my name into a database and find out every place that I've been forever. Okay? And so we're going to regulate. We're going to say this is the appropriate use and the inappropriate uses of it. Then we're going to start realizing, as David pointed out, that there's a lot of really good things that can happen with facial recognition. You never have to be at that party awkwardly saying, oh yeah, hi, how are you? Because it'll say right in your Google Glass, hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Right? And so suddenly we'll discover some greater utility to it. And it'll start being adapted. And then really it has to be inculcated into culture. Because if it's not inculcated into culture, if you have a conflict between law and culture, culture is going to win over law. And you
like
end
a
up with a
lawyer.
repressive society.
Okay, Alan?
I just want to follow that on what David said, is that our culture isn't static, it's fluid. And you can think of so many examples of where in the 20th century where something came out and they said, oh my God, this is the worst thing. Even our sexual
Ads
mores.
in movies.
Yeah, there you go. But, it has to do with sexual mores. It has to do with almost anything, people not wearing ties to work. I mean, it's even that mundane, but things, except in Washington.
Did you talk about me?
Yeah, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So I think as the younger generation, I have 3 teenage boys who I can't believe what they put on their Facebook and tweet when they occasionally let me see it. Although the male brain doesn't stop maturing until they're 25, so I think that has something to do with it. But
It doesn't start maturing? 'Cause I have 2 teenage kids.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The culture is gonna catch up, and so something that I find appalling is something that even my nieces who are in their 20s and 30s, they think I'm crazy. So.
Right.
So what happens is law follows technology. It lags. Then it locks itself in, and it stays there as technology keeps moving. So originally, well, we need a law to deal with this problem. It lags behind technology. Technology creates a legal problem. The law is passed, and then it stays static as technology bypasses it.
I think one of the most important things is trust. And right now, partly because we're in my opinion, a civil war, possibly deliberately instigated, we cannot trust each other enough to negotiate. And negotiation is what adults do. And we could negotiate pragmatic short-term 5-year...
You're not from this town, are you?
Pragmatic short-term 5-year solutions. We're all across the country praying, that well, I don't know. We have Jerry Brown there, so we maybe we're sappy. The point is that in the 5-year term, the 15-year term, and over the long run, accepting that we're going to live in a more open world. When our friend Peter Swire was part of the Presidential Commission.
Birthday today.
Yeah, and they came up with the NSA proposals. Half of them were sort of Potemkin, pat us on the head. These are new procedures. Maybe a small fraction of them were what we really need, and this is what I talk about in the Transparent Society, is aggressively looking back, which is what you guys are up to. Most of you guys in this row, God bless you, you're in the business of surveillance, turning the light back. And when people say, we can't do that because the mighty are mighty, and if there's open transparency, they'll have advantages. We have this new innovation of the non-governmental organization, in which masses of people can then allow you to hire top people on our behalf. And it's a brilliant addition to the Enlightenment. And it may be one of the reasons we can handle it.
But there are entire businesses, entire industries that are reliant upon the fact that you can keep secrets. So whether it's a law firm or a auto dealership that doesn't want you to know how much they paid for the car, or many news organizations, the ones that charge a lot of money, make their money because they give a certain select class that's wealthy enough to buy their service a little head start.
Tactical secrecy and personal privacy. But the way that we're going to be able to keep them is by having it be, as you were saying, selected segmentations, declared zones, and that within those zones, like the curtilage it's called, around your own home and your bedroom.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have privacy when people can make money by having privacy.
And is that a prediction that somebody will do that?
No, it's just it's a prediction that's when people can make money by protecting privacy or by encouraging privacy, we will have privacy.
A bunch of companies have tried to do that,
No,
and most of them
we
have
can
gone
make
out
a
of
lot
business.
more money by destroying privacy.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, Microsoft is trying to do that right now by offering a little bit more privacy than our competitors.
but
and it's very hard to show people that we actually are offering that
but
privacy.
offering privacy and allowing people to choose between private and not private isn't what I mean. What I mean is when privacy itself makes you money, all right, as opposed to openness. Right now, there's a market for data. Data can be sold for advertising and marketing and all kinds of stuff. All right, so data has value. Not having data doesn't have value, and it's a cost. So, for example, one of the questions I wrote in a brief in one of these the Clipper chip cases. Okay, and the question was about encryption or non-encryption. If we could have a society where everything was encrypted, or a society where nothing was encrypted, those are the two choices. Which one is a safer society?
I would argue the encrypted world, but I'm strange.
And I wrote a whole book about that.
Yes, you did. What's your?
I don't have an answer. I have a question.
Okay. Does anybody have an answer to that question? Okay.
I think if you're going to go all whole hog in one direction or another, it should be an open world. And here's the reason. That privacy is not enshrined in the Constitution. There are a couple of places where it's implicit. But it's very clear that privacy, as Jefferson said, privacy and property are contingent rights that each generation can redefine. A primary right is a right that has to be defended absolutely, because any entailment of it, any reduction of it, reduces our children's chances to change their minds about what was agreed by the previous generation about the contingent rights. And therefore, freedom to know and freedom to speak have to be absolute, because they cannot be diluted. So our children pass a law that everyone has to go around naked. You don't like that. So you stand on a street corner naked with the right to hold a sign saying, "I want clothes back," and to argue with them and buttonhole them and grab their non-existent lapel. And you can persuade them to change their minds. That's why to know and to speak are fundamental rights. And if you have those rights, if you are a powerful, sovereign, militant, powerful, middle-class citizenry, then you will vote yourselves some privacy. You'll find a way to have some privacy because it's what we want.
Okay. Question over here?
It's hard to follow that, but maybe the pursuit of happiness is relevant here. It struck me that privacy was sort of viewed as a very individual, we the consumers, the little people, and then there was sort of a shift when Google and everybody found out that their fibers were being spied on and that everybody, that their business materials were being taken. Do you see any alliance between the big guys and the small guys? Because there's a lot of vulnerability of the moneyed forces to exposure as well.
So who's going to have more confidentiality, the big guys or the little guys?
Well, sicking big guys against each other was always one of the fundamental techniques of the Enlightenment, preventing them from forming collusion and finding some big guys to sick against other big guys. That's why it's such a big agenda item to capture the federal government.
And the definition of privacy between the big guys and the little guys are completely different. What they consider to be privacy and what the little guys consider to be privacy are completely different things. The other thing is...
Can you give an example? What do you mean?
Sure. I mean, when you talk about individual privacy, you're talking about... There are various concepts of privacy. There's the right to be left alone.
I think we're talking here about confidentiality.
The confidentiality
small firms
of
versus
data.
big firms.
Well, I thought the individual against the company.
Today? Oh, the full spectrum, okay.
So the problem you have with the individual confidentiality is the concept of ownership of data. Who owns the data about you? If I pick up the phone and I make a phone call, there's a record of that phone call kept by AT&T. Under current law, those are not my records. While I have some privacy interests in them, they're very small. Those are the phone company's records of how I use their services. And so the vast majority of data about me is not mine. I don't have an ownership interest, and I only have a tangential privacy interest that the law recognizes. And I'm deliberately saying that the law recognizes. Whereas when corporations create data, they own that data for the most part. And so there's a difference in terms of how they control privacy.
Mark, what about a tangible interest rather than controlling your?
That's exactly what we need to do.
Information, but having a right to be paid.
Well, not just to be paid, but more than that. The idea should be that people have privacy interests, not necessarily a right, but privacy interests in data collected about them.
But I think that I would go further and say that we need a way of expressing shared ownership of intellectual property that we don't currently have in today's law, especially intellectual property that's data.
Like what?
So
What do you mean? What kind of intellectual property?
So my pet peeve is that I actually have to pay to get my credit rating.
Right.
And to me, that is uncivilized.
Right.
You know, if there's an organization that is going to derive profit off of having data of my transactions, then I have at least an ownership interest, not merely privacy, but an ownership interest in that data that entitles me to access to it and use it in the same way that my medical records, I have a shared interest in it. My interests are not exclusive to the doctor's interests because they are creating, the hospital and the doctor is co-generating that record with me. And I think but we have zero intellectual property framework right now for that type of recognized authorship of a data generator. And what we get really is law, as you pointed out, for people who are collecting the data in the first place, right, or creating them, or ending up with the metadata. And I think that, but the problem is so to answer your question, I would say, meh. You know, we may see places where there is an alignment between what citizenry are interested in and what public is, what certain large corporations want. There's an alignment. We may even see that there's suddenly a deep partnership on something. But I think that in general, for the foreseeable future, there is such a disparity between the amount of money that people are making off of aggregating data and the ability to share interest in that data with individuals and the lack of a legal framework for it, that the possibility of actual deep collaboration.
It's even worse if your name is Mike Nelson. You not only have to pay to get your credit report, you then have to spend a bunch of time fixing it because the other Mike Nelsons have done something that you got blamed for. Okay, question back here. Can everybody identify yourself too?
Lynn Wheeler, this is more pontificating. I wrote a bunch of the financial standards, both for security and the co-author of the financial privacy standard. For the privacy standard, I had to meet with a bunch of government privacy officers to capture the institutional knowledge about those institution privacy. But from the security standards, a lot of the agency people would show up, and my comment is that 10 plus years ago, a Snowden event would not have been possible because of processes in place that would have prevented that sort of system and attack. The past 10 years have gotten worse. But I then got...
Or better.
Depend on what way you look at it. But then I got on sort of the opposite end of the financial industry when I was brought in to California to help with the electronic signature law, the data breach notification law, and the opt-in privacy sharing law. Now, we got out electronic signature. We barely got out data breach because Congress was trying to preempt it to eliminate all requirements The issue is that institutions do security to protect themselves. Data breaches, the institution isn't at risk, it's the individual. And so they had no motivation to do anything about data breaches. But in the opt-in privacy sharing, they managed at the last moment to get a preemption amendment to GLBA for opt-out. Graham-Leach-Bliley, which is now better known for repeal Glass-Steagall enabling too big to fail. But at the time, the rhetoric on the floor of Congress was the primary purpose of GLBA was to eliminate new entries into the banks, financial industry, so that you wouldn't have Microsoft, which was named on the floor of Congress, competing with the banks because Microsoft had better technology. But what wound up happening was that they got an amendment for opt-out that said they could share your privacy information, your personal information, unless you objected to it. And that if they didn't have a record of you objecting, they could share it. So the middle of the last, about 6, 7 years ago, we went, there was a group that went to the FTC that showed that none of the institutions that were required to maintain opt-out privacy were actually maintaining any records whatsoever. That even the very weak opt-out sharing wasn't being enforced by the FTC, and the FTC constantly ignored it, foray after foray. Whereas California actually got very close to doing opt-in along with, at the same time of doing data breach, which said that your information by institutions would not be allowed to be shared unless you specifically agreed to it and that they had a record proving it.
That's about 5 interesting questions embedded in there, but let me pick up one thing you said. You were talking about the data breach legislation in California, and I think that's a brilliant example of where government-enforced transparency puts pressure on companies to do the right thing with regard to cybersecurity.
And I want to point
So
out something about California.
I want to challenge the panel. Are there other places where we should have government-enforced transparency for the good of the digital economy? Things that we could do that would make e-commerce work better, e-government work better?
Well, we tried to do it in the SEC arena, where we tried to make companies disclose the state of their cybersecurity. And the problem with that is, if you disclose our cybersecurity sucks, you basically make yourself a target. Mm-hmm. And if you disclose the normal pablum that they put into SEC disclosures, which is, we are always at risk of attack, but we have comprehensive measures designed to deal with it poorly, it becomes meaningless. So sometimes transparency actually becomes a bad thing. If you had to tell everybody every vulnerability you had and tell the hackers that, it would be a bad thing. Of course, only for a brief period of time, because then you'd have to get much more secure much faster.
Well, there was that classic case about 15 years ago where the EPA decided they didn't want to disclose where all the toxic chemicals were. It was, back in the 80s and 90s, it was considered a good thing that neighborhoods
But we have this debate on 0 days.
Right.
Do we disclose 0 days before we have a patch?
Yep. Okay. Alan, did you have a comment on what government should force us to be more transparent about?
Actually, the toxic release inventory was a good example. I wasn't thinking of it. I was just thinking in the whole field, Sunlight is involved as well, just, who's giving what to whom. And
campaign contributions.
Campaign contributions.
Yes. But a certain gentleman who was CEO of Mozilla got caught up because of some money he gave, 8, 9 years ago to oppose a gay rights initiative in California. So again, he probably wishes that had been forgotten.
Sure, it's important to recognize, and I'm sorry to jump in, I'll
go ahead,
back
please.
over, but I mean, there's an idea that I think flows from the secret ballot, which is designed to prevent the buying of votes, that is incorrectly extended to this idea that you should be able to participate anonymously and without consequences in our political discourse, and it's just wrong. Particularly if you're going to inject money into our politics, you should be accountable for that. People should be aware of the position that you're trying to shift the system toward. That just is a baseline.
Which means also piercing corporate
veils.
I would
that's
change,
very true. Yeah.
I would alter. I'm going to phrase what you did slightly differently. I'll take responsibility for it. if you are spending money to advocate for something, you don't, the interesting question is do you necessarily get to say that you're not an advocate later on? Right?
Right.
Can you advocate with one hand and deny being an advocate on the other hand? And I think that and at what point is there a scale? Because I think the money is really a form of advocacy. Like I'm going to put this message out there, but I'm going to not acknowledge that it's me putting that message out there. And you can easily draw up a scenario, which is, on one hand, I don't want people to know that I'm fighting X, but the other hand, it's like I don't want people to know that I'm actually doing this other thing that I'd like, I'm actually